Welcome to another Leumi Investment Corner. With us is Michael Zaremsky, head of U.S. Private Banking for Bank Leumi USA, member of the Investment Committee for Leumi Investment Services. Michael, good to speak with you again.
Great to speak with you, Zev. Thank you.
You know, we're celebrating Israel's 71st birthday anniversary of the creation of the State of Israel. So, of course, people are very vested in the country. So people are wondering, how can we invest? How can I invest in Israel? So what do you tell people?
Zev, it's a very fascinating question, and I think so many people are very familiar with Israel as the startup nation and all the technology that surrounds Israel. And I think that there's a little bit of a struggle in terms of understanding the economic drivers that make Israel what it is in terms of the technology innovations versus what the public opportunities are for investment. And I think that that's one of the real issues that people struggle with in terms of what is the most appropriate way to get the exposure in Israel that people are trying to garner when they're thinking about Israel as the tech nation or the startup nation.
So obviously there are different ways to invest in Israel. You can invest in real estate, you can invest in companies. So let's look at both of them.
Right. So what I find really fascinating about it is, most people, particularly when you have an American mindset, you think that all of the public equity markets are similar to the S&P 500 in terms of the way that they reflect the general economic conditions of the nation. But when you look at a country like Israel, which is a lot smaller, has a lot less public capitalization and a far fewer amount of companies, the breakdown of the public equity market is very different than the economic driver. So what does that mean? And again, I think the easy way of looking at it is if you think about Israel as the startup nation and the technology that drives it. If you and I were in the United States and we had a really good technological application, we wanted to have a startup company, our goal would be to be the next Facebook. But if you and I were looking at the same business model in Israel, chances are our business model is how do we sell to Facebook? And a lot of that is because of the difference of the size of the U.S. capital markets versus the size of the Israel capital markets. So what you end up getting in Israel is a lot of companies that are publicly traded that don't necessarily reflect kind of that technology or the startup nation feel of it. So, for example, if you look at the public equity markets as reflected by, the Tel Aviv 35, there is a fairly sizable component of information technology to it. Those tend to be more mature companies, not necessarily the startup companies, but you also have about 25% that's financials. You also have about 15% of it that's healthcare, kind of largely concentrated in a company like Teva. And a lot of the other companies that are in there, again, are the more established, mature companies that don't really reflect the dynamic nature of the economy. So when people say, I want to invest in the public equity markets in Israel, they may not necessarily be getting the exposure that they think they are. I think turning it around in a different manner, the economic success of Israel is really determined by a lot of that startup nation feel. And I think one of the best examples is looking at a company like Mobileye, which was a huge purchase by Intel several years ago. When Mobileye got purchased by Intel, the market capitalization basically shifted from Israel public equity markets to U.S. public equity markets because it was now under the Intel umbrella. However, the economic benefits really accrued to Israel in terms of the foreign direct investment from Intel, as well as all the salaries and all the other benefits that accrued to the people working for the company in Israel. So when you look at the bond market, you look at the currency market, you look at the real estate market, a lot of that is fueled by economic activity, which again is not necessarily reflected in public equity markets.
Fascinating. You mentioned the real estate market. It's still very hot? Because I know with French Jews and other Jews around the world buying property, it seems like it's escalating also.
Yeah, and again, I think typically the real estate market is going to reflect economic conditions. You see it here in the United States. You see it in different points in time. In London for a while, real estate was really hot, and in Israel it's really hot. And again, I think a lot of it just goes to kind of the scarcity of property plus the affluence that's being accumulated by a lot of these types of dynamics that I talked about. So because a lot of Israelis are benefiting from the technology and the startup nation concept, you're getting wealth creation in Israel, which is, again, feeding into where the places are where you can invest, and real estate clearly has been a beneficiary of that. And again, I think you also see the strength of it in the Israeli bond market, which has done quite well, and it's one of the few sovereign countries where you're actually seeing upgrading of sovereign debt as opposed to countries saddled with a lot of debt and downgrades. So again, a lot of different dynamics, and I think that the key element of it is what is the exposure you really want to try to gain, and how is the best way to accomplish that. And I think one of the challenges that the Israeli government is also facing is, with a lot of wealth being created through private equity and a lot of retail investing happening in the public equity, how do you kind of balance that out, and how do you get more public investment into the private equity sector, which is where a lot of wealth is truly created?
I love what you say. I never thought of it this way. In the United States, companies want to be Facebook. In Israel, they want to sell to Facebook. That's a brilliant way of looking at it. So, Michael Zaremsky, I want to thank you, head of U.S. Private Banking for Bank Leumi USA, member Investment Committee for Leumi Investment Services. Thank you for being here with us. We look forward to speaking with you next week about some more investment ideas. And if people have any questions, they can always go to the website or call 1-800-892-5430, 1-800-892-5430. Michael, thank you.
Thank you very much, Zev. Always appreciate it.
And we're going to be right back.